10, and we're going to go ahead and get started with our input session this morning. My name is Tamara Holmes. I'm the director of the Office of Broadband, and welcome to our second input session this week. And this one is focused on the new broadband availability map, and we'll discuss data submission process guidelines. Before we go ahead and get started and go over our agenda, I'd like to give our partners with Virginia Tech an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Brandon, if you want to introduce yourself and your team.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Brandon Herndon. I work for the Center for Geospatial Information Technology at Virginia Tech. Our history of this program is about 10 years ago. We started developing and then managing the broadband map, availability map for Virginia. So, we're excited to be able to finally improve it above and beyond what the FCC provides and provide, better data to our citizens here in Virginia. On my team is Joe Newman and Mario Garza. They're some developers that help us keep this going. I'm the project manager for this effort.
Thank you, Brandon, for introducing yourself and your team. And Chandler, if you want to go ahead and go to the first slide. So today's agenda is me doing the welcome. And then you all will hear from Aaron Barnes, Lonnie Hamilton, and Chandler Vaughn for the remainder of the presentation to discuss the data submission guidelines and also go through any questions and answers you all may have. Next slide, Chandler. So just to kind of lay the framework for the development of the new map, as you all know, there was a special session in 2021 that directed our agency, the Department of Housing and Community Development, to develop a statewide broadband availability map, including broadband coverage. As directed in the budget bill, all broadband service providers shall be required to submit updated service territory data to the department annually, containing the locations to which they provide broadband service. The guidelines that we will be presenting today were not developed in a vacuum. They actually are very much closely in line with the requirements through the Broadband Data Act. It's a really long title, so I'm just going to say Broadband Data Act, and also the Federal Communication Commission's recently, they issued a third report in order. So just know that all the information that's contained in our guidelines really reflect the requirements that the FCC will be following as they develop the new map for the United States in terms of broadband coverage. So I just wanted to kind of share with you all and lay that this wasn't something that DHCD kind of did on their own. We were definitely directed through the budget bill to focus on what was required through the new Broadband Data Act that was adopted by Congress last year. So with that, I want to turn it over to Aaron Barnes, one of our broadband planners at our agency.
Morning, everybody. As Tamara said, I'm Aaron Barnes, broadband planner in the Office of Broadband. Chandler, if you could go to the next slide. So to get us started on our proposed guidelines, broadband providers shall be required to submit updated service territory data to the department annually, keyword annually, and the service territory data has actually built out their broadband network infrastructure. So the keyword in that is actually built out their broadband network infrastructure, and also able to provide that service through a standard broadband installation. And I'll be getting into thank you, Chandler, what a standard broadband installation is in the next slide. So I won't read the entire definition, but there's three things I wanted to highlight within that. So for the standard broadband installation, first I wanted to highlight where it says with no charges or delays attributable to the extension of the network of the provider. Second part I wanted to highlight was for the initiation of fixed broadband internet access service through a routine installation. So what we would consider a routine installation. And if you look in the last sentence of this paragraph, where it has 10 business days. So not completed no later than 10 business days after the date on which the service request is submitted. So I just really wanted to highlight those three parts of that. And you can kind of like go over it and see what the rest of it says. But those are the three things I wanted to highlight. Chandler, if you could go to the last slide. So this slide basically talks about who is required to submit this data. So we have terrestrial, fixed, mobile, or fixed wireless or satellite, providing broadband internet access service, and includes entities required to provide the federal government with information for the FCC Form 477, which most of you are probably familiar with, and also through the Federal Digital Opportunity Data Collection Program. Then that last bullet you'll see, we talk about satellite-based broadband providers, pretty much providing comparable data as the other broadband providers. And with that, I will pass it to Lonnie.
Morning, everyone. Lonnie Hamilton. I'm also a broadband planner at the Office of Broadband. So it's important to note that everything that you submit as part of this data collection effort is automatically FOIA exempt. So you don't have to apply for that yourself. And there's also some pretty strict guardrails on what we could do with the data. And so it is for the map and just for the map. And we can't do anything else with this data without the express written permission of the broadband provider that submitted the data. So don't worry, this is going to stay locked up in secret. Next slide. The data requirements are going to be based on what's in the Broadband Data Act, and so that will include service territory data to the address level. However, instead of collecting it by address, we actually are going to be using the unique identifiers that come in the VGIS site address database. And so these are unique IDs that line up to specific addresses. And so, and alongside that, we'll also be collecting data on what actually provides the service through the FCC tech codes, maximum available speeds, business or residential service latency, and a few other things. Next slide. We will be collecting this data in CSV format ideally, but we can also accept GIS shapefiles if that works better for the provider. And I think with that, I'm turning it over to Chandler.
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. Good to see everybody. Chandler Vaughn. I am not a planner in the Office of Broadband. That's why they gave me the easy slides to go through to finish us out here. I work as a policy analyst in the office, but just to go through some timeline things and then wrap up with questions and next steps. And first, too, while we're on the point of questions, if you're on Google Meet, we'd ask that you type your questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything in the chat box, and then we'll get to those questions here in a couple of slides. And then we're also going to open it up for folks at the end over the phone too, to talk about questions, comments, anything that folks over the phone may have, because they aren't able to access the chat box, of course. So submission timeline, the data must be submitted to this portal that will be hosted on the Department of Housing and Community Development website by December 3rd, 2021. That's so we can develop beta testing versions of the map and then get an ultimate map published in early to mid 2022. After submission, pressing submit in the portal, providers will be notified of a successful submission. And once the data has been verified to be functional, that'll be the folks in our office partnering with the folks from Virginia Tech to notify that the data we have is good, functional, and acceptable for mapping purposes. And then failure to submit that data by the deadline may result in supplemental action by the Commonwealth of Virginia. Petition of Map inaccuracies. We know that folks, may not get it perfect on the first time. I think there's going to be a wide range of, data that's submitted. Once that coverage data is published on the state broadband map, there's going to be an opportunity for counties, local governments, government entities, and third parties, citizens, to petition the accuracy of this data. So there'll be a process set forth for those folks to send an email or fill out a form to say, hey, this map I believe is inaccurate because of anecdotal information or speed tests or other data that they submit as a part of that petition process. So next steps and contact. We'll talk about next steps and timeline and then open it up for Q&A after that. But the public comment window closes on these guidelines tomorrow. Please send those comments to broadband@dhcd.virginia.gov. The updated guidelines will be released on November 8th. And on that same date, those guidelines will also be posted to the Town Hall portal, the Commonwealth's official system for commenting on guidelines. We want to be able to account for all those substantial comments, though, before those guidelines are posted to Town Hall. So please, if you're submitting substantial comments about these guidelines, do so by tomorrow close of business so we can get those incorporated before we post on Town Hall on November 8th and open up that portal on the 8th as well. And then lastly, December 3rd, we talked about on the last slide, service territory data submission deadline. So with that, I saw a message from Brandon in the chat box, just to read it for folks over the phone. Submitted data will be at address level. However, information on the resulting map available to the public will be aggregated at the census block level. Address level data will not be public. Thanks for clarifying that, Brandon. So with that, if anybody has a question in Google Meet, feel free to also unmute yourself if you want to ask it live and in person, or drop those questions, comments in the chat box, please.
Chandler, this is Ben Aaron with CTIA. I do have statement, comment, and maybe a few questions. Go ahead. All right, thank you. So, I'm Ben Aaron. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Regulatory Affairs for CTIA, and CTIA, for those that don't know, is the trade association for the wireless industry. So our members, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, US Cellular, are the carriers that you're asking to, well, that the legislature has tasked you to collect data from. And, we're happy to engage the department in this regard. We understand that the department's job fundamentally is to identify the solutions to bridge the digital divide and to improve broadband access all across Virginia. And, we recognize, very, very much recognize that we are a huge part of the solution for bridging the digital divide. 43% of Virginians today are wireless only. We have 8.4 million subscriber connections across the Commonwealth. So we're a huge part of that solution today. We'll be a huge part of that solution tomorrow. And we look forward to working with the department as you guys identify ways to combat or bridge the divide, identify the areas that need further construction. We also understand, and we're committed to working with you on maps. We understand the important role that maps play in bridging the digital divide. But our goal, our interest here is to make sure that you get the best start that you have, that you can possibly have, and don't have a stumble at the start. And we're a little bit afraid that that's exactly what's going to happen. At the opening, Brandon had indicated that this is a chance to collect data that's above and beyond what the FCC's required. That's not only not true, it's illegal. So we're very concerned, just from Brandon's statement at the outset, that the level setting really needs to get done immediately. And again, this is in the spirit of cooperation. We're going to file comments that explain what we think are easy fixes to this. But without those, this could be a very troubled process. So one of the things that the legislature got right, in our opinion, very much got right, is the requirement that you harmonize your efforts with those that are already out there at the federal level. And the language that they used regarding that harmonization was very specific. They prohibited collection of data beyond that which the provider is required to submit to the Federal Communications Commission pursuant to, and I'll use the same that Tamara did, Ms. Holmes did, and that's just the Broadband Data Act. It is a mouthful. I agree with Ms. Holmes. So again, it prohibited you from collecting data beyond that which is provided, which providers are required to submit to the FCC under the Data Act. So with that in mind, I'm not sure how I can reconcile that with Brandon's opening statement. And there are some areas of tension. We will cover those in the comments. I don't really want to get into that today. Much better to leave that in writing. Happy to give you examples if you want them, but let's set that aside. We think there's a very easy and readily available solution here that the department can avail itself of. We're happy to assist the department in getting this done. And that is pull maps that the FCC already has. My members have already submitted maps to the FCC, 4G LTE maps that meet the Data Act requirements. Those maps are very current. They were submitted on May 15th, 2021. And future maps will be submitted as well as the FCC's process requires. 5G maps, frankly, will be available to the FCC once they finish the data collection. So it's important, we think, that the department look to those maps and consider using those maps in this process. I think subsection 8 of the statute, just to go a step further, offers the ability to get a waiver from the annual requirement through the department if the maps that are publicly available are as detailed or more detailed than those that the department is permitted to require submission of. And we would suggest that the FCC's maps meet the requirement for that waiver, and that the department is also prohibited from requiring what Brandon said, which is above and beyond the FCC. It's just not allowed. We can help facilitate access to the maps. We understand that several states have already gotten access to the FCC's maps. If the department would like to engage with CTIA to facilitate communication with the FCC, or directly with CTIA's members to facilitate the access to the maps, we're happy to do that. And I want to close with two public policy concerns that really drive this, aside from just the duplication of effort that we're afraid may happen, and the lack of efficiency in multiple maps. You have two real public policy problems on your side. On our side, we have the issue of potentially having to provide the FCC with maps, and then each of the states having a potentially different map. But on the public policy side, you run the risk that consumers look at the maps you're creating and the FCC's maps, and they end up confused as to what is accurate, because they're not going to show the same thing if you don't use the same parameters. And that's a bad public policy result for everyone. It's just a bad result, and one that's easily avoided. The other point that we want to raise is that when your agency and the federal government are trying to achieve the same goal, and that is to get broadband everywhere, to spur deployment, encourage deployment, bridge the digital divide, et cetera, when you have the same goal, but you're using different tools, especially when those tools are the maps, you run the risk of overbuilding and or underbuilding, both of which are terrible results. Overbuilding is a waste of money. Underbuilding, is a waste of, of everybody's, not a waste, but is the very thing that you're trying to conquer. But you can avoid those by using the same tools. Those maps are at the FCC and they're available to the department. So we really do encourage you guys to avail yourself of those maps. We're happy to facilitate that. We work with the department. Our industries work with the department, both our members individually and us as an association. Happy to continue doing that and look forward to engaging with the department. We will file our comments to give better detail on this, but just in a nutshell, we really, really, really stress that the approach Brandon described is just not permitted under the statute. There's an easy solution, the FCC's maps, and we're happy to facilitate your access to those maps if you need our assistance to get that. So I really appreciate the ability to speak now, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ben, thank you for your comments. This is Tamara here. To your point, and I think Brandon put something in the chat, put a note in the chat box. When Brandon made a statement earlier, he was really referring to the current FCC map, not the proposed new FCC map in terms of what data providers will be required to provide to the Commonwealth of Virginia and under the new legislation adopted by the GA last summer. He was just saying the current map. That's what he was referring to. And to your point, there is a difference between you all in a unique situation. So we do know that there's been a lag in the development of the new broadband map by the FCC. And you're right, you all have, there's current data that your industry members have provided to the FCC that may ultimately be able to be gathered from the FCC and utilized on the Virginia broadband map. There is a difference between the cellular data map being available currently and the fixed wireless and the wireline service and the satellite service, which is something that the FCC is currently working through. So you all could potentially seek a waiver under the legislation adopted by the General Assembly last year. So we can have a conversation about that because of the timing. There's a difference between what you all have provided currently to the FCC based on your coverage and what the other broadband providers are going to be providing to the FCC based on the third, I'm going to probably butcher the name, third report in order, or report third order. It's something we referenced it earlier. So we definitely would love to welcome, your comments and have a conversation with you and your members about what you already have provided to the FCC, because I will be honest with you, as we were going through the third order report, if someone can type exactly what it's called in the chat, we did notice about the mobile data requirements, and that you all have actually been providing some of that data as a way before the map was actually being developed by the FCC. So to your point, yes, you could potentially seek a waiver based on the legislation adopted by the GA for mobile broadband data. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out there.
I appreciate that. And Ms. Holmes, would it be helpful if I sort of I could set up a call with the carriers directly so we can sort of start that conversation? Would you like me to do that? Do you want to, however I can facilitate that discussion, I'm more than happy to engage. So can I shoot you an email after, and maybe we set up a call with the members and they can talk to you about okay.
No, that'll be great. I know we did know that the governor's deputy broadband advisor, Kyle Rouser, did try to reach out to a couple of different industry representatives, and we hadn't had much success. So that'll be great for us to schedule a call to discuss the mobile broadband data.
Perfect. I'll shoot you an email, get some available times for, what are we at, Thursday? All right, Thursday. So next week, I'll get some available times from you, from the members. We'll set up a call and we'll get started in that conversation. I'll just note anecdotally, I went on vacation this summer, and in the past, so it's a small little island off the coast of North Carolina, right outside of Wilmington, North Carolina. In the past, like there's been some spots at the ends of the island, or not exactly the greatest for coverage, but I used the map to check on it, and sure enough, I don't know if it's new equipment, new tower, new whatever, but they said on the map that I would have coverage, and it was seamless. So they seem, from my experience, limited, admittedly, but from my experience, it seems like the map is pretty good. So I'm happy to get that conversation started. I'll absolutely reach out. Ms. Holmes, do you want me to reach out? I have your email. I think I've seen that from the department's website. Is there anyone else, Aaron, Chandler, Brandon, anyone, or do you just want to coordinate on your end? Who else will join?
We can coordinate on our end. You can just shoot the email to me or the broadband email box. We have access to all of that, so that'll be fine. And we look forward to talking to you all.
Great. All right. Lovely. I'll set that up. Thank you so much.
Okay. And then I see that there's a question or a statement from Catherine Rice. I'm going to read it. If data is being shown on map only at census block level, how will you show if only one household in the census block has broadband, but the rest of the homes don't? If only a percentage of households have broadband. Now, with that, I'm probably going to kick it over to either one of the planners or the folks from Virginia Tech. Catherine, the legislation, I will say the legislation does not allow us to relinquish the location-based data on the map, so we can't map individual locations, which is why we have to aggregate the data and show it by census block. But I'm going to actually, either Brandon, I don't know if you want to take it, or if Lonnie, you all want to take that statement and kind of explain the methodology that we've been discussing internally regarding how we're going to actually display the data publicly. Brandon, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure, I can. No problem, Tamara. And just quick question, or quick comment back to Mr. Aaron is, for the data submission too, not only are we striving for this more granular data that's required in the third order, but also, we'd like to receive it in a more timely manner too, because currently there's like an 18-month lag between, for 477 at least, on what is submitted from the providers to the FCC before we can even get it to map it. So that's another, thing we're trying to bridge, is that timeline gap, so people aren't looking at data that's over a year old. To Catherine's question, we're going to aggregate the data at census block level. One thing that we don't currently have right now is like a level of coverage. So for example, if one household is covered in a census block, the FCC shows that as served, which everyone knows isn't really correct or a good way to do it. So what we're having internal discussions now with is what we'll be able to generate statistics now that we have addresses on what percentage of address points are covered within a census block. So now we're having the question of what's the threshold to make that census block covered. One example we have is Georgia's broadband map. Their legislation, I believe their threshold is 80%. We think that's too low. We've been talking around 90 or low 90% to state that a census block is served. And then the users, although they can't see address level information, will be able to see those percentage coverages on the served and unserved census blocks, but we have not yet made a determination or with DHCD on what that threshold will be.
And then I just want to point out, Catherine, because I think one of your point might be, because you do work with municipalities, is, you know, how is the data going to be useful for municipalities as they think about coming in for body or looking at whether it's going to get funding from NTIA or, you know, depending on what happens with the infrastructure bill, there'll be additional money that localities can tap into to do broadband expansion. One of the things that's beneficial is, one, DHCD is the sponsor of the map, and while we won't be able to publicly share the location-based data, we internally can utilize that data to provide technical assistance to localities as they're developing universal broadband plans. If you all are familiar with and I'm probably going to butcher, I'm so bad with like remembering, I can remember an acronym, but I can't remember what it stands for, but there's the National Broadband Availability Map. I think I got that one right. Through NTIA, which is the NBAM map, it's the same thing. They aggregate all the data and they map it, but we know in Virginia, we can go pull our data from the NBAM map and look at location-based data. So I will say that while we have to map the information publicly by census block because we have to aggregate it, we will be able to provide technical assistance to localities along with internet service providers to validate the service coverage and also identify gaps within the census block as we're providing technical assistance. And I think that's one benefit. I mean, there's several benefits to having a Virginia broadband map, but I think that's definitely one of the benefits as us having an Office of Broadband to be able to help communities as they identify areas that are unserved. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Catherine, I see your point. I'm writing 99% down. Does anyone else have any comments or questions they'd like to put in the chat box? Oh, I see Kevin McNulty has raised his hand. And after that, we'll go to the folks on the phone.
Good morning, Dr. Holmes. Just a question from our team is, what is the standard for measuring latency? I know that it's defined in there, but is there going to be more information included for what are acceptable forms of measuring that?
Brandon, do you all have that information? I know you all work with the team to put together what we put in the guidelines. Do you have that information on latency at all? And if not, we can get back to Mr. McNulty.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me right now. I know it's based on the verbiage from the third order. So whatever the third order specifies is the latency requirement that we'll have in our instructions as well.
It is less than or equal to 100 milliseconds.
Thank you, Mario.
Correct, but I guess that, and I'm by no means the technical expert on this, but the feedback I got was that there's a wide array of measuring for that, and there's no real standard tool to measure. So our team was looking for what will be the acceptable tools that we can provide to show that we have that measurement.
Okay, so we'll talk internally as a team, and Kevin, if you want to put your email in the email box, in the chat box, sorry. If you can put your email in the chat box, we can make sure we get that in. We'll definitely be sure to provide some additional guidance in the final guidelines that'll be posted in November. Nathan, I see you have your hand raised. And if there's anyone on the phone, just go ahead and, once Nathan goes, you all can jump in.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Holmes. Thank you for hosting this webinar. I appreciate it. I have three questions related to, I think, clarifying for myself some of what you mentioned in this presentation. I'll try to be concise. The first two relate to, I think it was slide 11, but the submission timeline. I think there was a mention that after submission, providers will be notified once the data is verified. And I was curious if there's also, if that will cause a lag in the official receipt of any data that's provided, or if we'll also receive would also receive a notification at the time of submission. That's a small point. The second question related to that slide is there's a mention of supplemental action, and I wonder if you can define that. And then I have a third question that's not related to that slide.
Okay, so for your first question regarding the submission portal, Brandon, do you all want to comment? I know we did, and just so you guys know, we will be doing a presentation once the guidelines are adopted. We will have a presentation, almost like we did for the utility leverage program on like a how-to. So we will be sharing, screenshots and things of that nature, but I'm going to kick it over to Brandon to answer your question about the portal.
Yeah, no problem. So we're planning on having 2 checks really. One is a check upon submission. That's sort of a dynamic check to make sure that the files and file types are what we're expecting. And then you should receive a message, successful submission. You'll be notified if there's any issues with your data. We're still determining on what the exact verbiage will be upon submission. When we get the data and go to map it, if there's any issues with that, then we'll contact whoever the POC is listed in the submission form when the data is submitted. So there'll be an initial submission that'll be very quick, just a cursory check. And then once we actually go to map the data and incorporate it into map and into our database, then, we'll send out another, or if there's an issue with it, then we'll contact the provider. But the initial submission should be pretty quick as far as confirmation that it was good.
Thank you, Brandon. And Nathan, to your second question regarding the third bullet, I too had asked this question because I've never managed a program that required supplemental action by the Commonwealth of Virginia. So my understanding, based on talking to our Assistant Attorney General, is that because the submission requirement, submitting the data is actually required under code now, that there would be some communication between the Attorney General's office and the providers regarding the need to submit the data. I don't know what that entails, but I do understand that because it's now written in code that broadband providers must submit this data to the Commonwealth annually, that there will be some communication in the event that a provider does fail to submit the data by the deadline. What that entails, I don't know. We're still waiting for guidance from the AG's office.
Okay, thank you. And my next clarifying question relates to, I think it was 13. It's related to the petition of map inaccuracies. I didn't notice that there's a detailed process for how that will work, and I was curious if there's anywhere I can find that, or do you have any additional information as to how that process will work?
Hey, Nathan, I can take that one. I think that the lack of details around that process now are kind of purposeful to see what is recommended in the guideline process. No, we don't have an official idea or framework of how we see that happening. Happy to entertain public comments on it. But yeah, looking forward to reading through what you have to say there.
Thank you.
Is there anyone on the phone that might have any questions or comments at all? No, anyone else on the Google Meets have any questions or comments at this time? And I would just like to recommend, and the guys typed it in the chat, the third report in order. I'm going to get it right one day, guys. I would say if you want to get some good sleep one night, take a look at that document. It's very detailed. Like I said, our guidelines were directly derived from that. Nathan, thank you to your question about the petition. I saw earlier that there is a written petition process on the FCC side, so we'll be taking a look at what they've done since they've updated their website as well. And then again, please submit any comments that you all might have regarding the development of our guideline process. We will, again, once the guidelines have been adopted, we will be doing an input session, well, not input session, but a how to apply with our partners at Virginia Tech to kind of share, instructions on how to submit your data and if you have any questions once we get everything up and running. And Brandon did put in the chat box the link to the third report in order. And there's a third report in order that just came out, looks like January 2021. Okay, and there's a question from Tom Eanes. The CSV spreadsheet bullet points indicates that providers should distinguish between residential and business. So would business locations have installation windows longer than 10 days? Was that on our slide, Tom? Or is that an actual guideline document?
I think what Tom's referring to is the 10-day requirement here, 10 business day requirement under a standard broadband installation. Sorry, Tom, I see you're unmuted now.
So the standard broadband installation within 10 days. I'm wondering if, commercial customers routinely, there's more than 10 days between request of service and installation. But I don't think the intention is that location would be considered unserved, right? Just because it took longer than 10 days. So I didn't know if you would distinguish between a residential install window versus a business install window.
We will check on that. I do know the definition came from, and I keep trying to say this third or fourth in order. I do know the definition of a standard broadband installation came from the FCC document. So we'll go back and take a look at that to see if there's some distinction between residential and commercial customers.
Okay.
And then Chandler just wanted to, it looks like there's a note in the chat box, just housekeeping. Our slides and a recording of the meeting will be made available on the DHCD website. Any more comments or questions before we adjourn our meeting? I feel like I just realized we were recording the meeting and I can't pronounce their report in order. So if no one has any more comments or questions, we look forward to hearing from you all. Don't forget, written comments are due tomorrow. If anyone would like to have a conversation with ourselves or the team at Virginia Tech, please send an email to broadband@dhcd.virginia.gov. Again, thank you all for your support in this, and we look forward to having a new Virginia broadband availability map. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day.